I am Hercule Poirot. Welcome to my new mystery story.
The blizzard that descended upon the Alpine passes that December evening was the sort that transforms the civilized world into something primordial and unforgiving. Snow fell not merely as weather, but as a declaration of nature's supremacy over human ambition. The Midnight Express, that pinnacle of continental luxury that had carried diplomats and dowagers across Europe for decades, found itself reduced to a beautiful prisoner, trapped in drifts that rose like white battlements against the carriage windows. From my compartment in the first-class section, I watched the storm's relentless assault with the mixture of fascination and unease that such displays of natural power inspire in civilized men. The train had been making good time through Switzerland when the weather closed its fist around us. Now, somewhere between Interlaken and the Austrian border, we sat motionless while the wind howled its ancient song and the snow-built walls that no amount of human determination could quickly breach. The dining car that evening had offered its usual theater of human nature, though the storm outside lent an edge of intimacy to our gathering. We were, after all, no longer merely passengers sharing a journey. We had become involuntary companions in confinement, and there is nothing quite like the prospect of extended proximity to make one study one's fellow travelers with fresh attention. At the head table sat Madame Katerina Volkov, a Russian émigré whose tragic beauty carried the weight of revolution and exile. Her dark eyes held secrets that decades of comfortable Western living had not entirely erased, and she wore her jewels, particularly a magnificent sapphire necklace known as the Winter Star, with the defiant pride of one who has lost everything once and refuses to surrender what remains. Her fingers, pale and restless, seemed always to drift toward the velvet case that never left her side. Lady Honoria Pemberton commanded the center of the car with the effortless authority of the English aristocracy. Her conversation was a masterpiece of charitable concern and gentle malice, delivered with the smile of one who has spent decades managing both fortune and reputation. Her companion, Miss Agnes Whitmore, possessed that particular severity of manner that marks the professional spinster, sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and indispensable to those who require their secrets managed with discretion. The financial world was represented by Mr. Julian Ashford, whose success in international banking had earned him both a knighthood and a reputation for ruthlessness that his genial manner could not entirely conceal. He studied his fellow passengers with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to evaluating human worth in precise monetary terms. Captain Edmund Forrester, recently returned from service in India, carried himself with the rigid bearing of a military man struggling with peacetime's softer demands. His consumption of brandy had increased steadily throughout dinner, and his comments grew more pointed as the evening progressed, particularly when the conversation turned to matters of honor and duty. Miss Beatrice Harrington, a novelist whose detective stories had earned her both fame and the grudging respect of critics, observed our little company with the frank interest of one professionally concerned with human motivation. Her questions, posed with disarming charm, had a way of eliciting more information than their targets intended to provide. Dr. Sanjay Mukherjee, a distinguished physician and scholar returning from a medical conference in Vienna, brought to our gathering the quiet authority of learning and the particular perspective of one who has observed human nature in extremis. His gentle manner concealed a penetrating intelligence that missed little of what transpired around him. The evening's entertainment began innocently enough. Lady Pemberton, emboldened by champagne and the peculiar intimacy that shared confinement creates, had persuaded Madame Volkov to display her famous Winter Star. The sapphire, when revealed in its velvet nest, drew gasps of genuine admiration. It was a stone that seemed to hold winter itself captive, blue as Arctic ice, yet burning with an inner fire that spoke of imperial splendor and tragic romance. From the court of the Tsars, Madame Volkov explained with the melancholy pride of the dispossessed. It survived revolution, exile, and 3 husbands. I wear it as a reminder that beauty endures when empires fall. Captain Forrester, his voice thick with brandy and bitterness, raised his glass in a toast that carried more irony than celebration. To survival, then, and to the wisdom of keeping one's treasures close. The warning in his words proved prophetic, though none of us recognized it at the time. The theft occurred with the precision of a stage magician's trick. Madame Volkov, retiring briefly to the washroom at the car's end, left her compartment locked and the Winter Star secured in its small safe, a precaution that seemed adequate for a journey among civilized people. She was absent no more than 5 minutes, yet when she returned and opened the safe with her own key, the velvet case gaped empty. Her cry of anguish brought us all running. The corridor filled with concerned faces and urgent questions, but the facts remained stubbornly impossible. The compartment had been locked. The window, sealed with ice from the storm, showed no signs of tampering. The safe, though forced, had been opened with skill rather than violence. Most puzzling of all, Albert Morse, the sleeping car attendant, swore he had remained in the corridor throughout, tending to a flickering lamp, and had seen no one approach Madame Volkov's door. Heinrich Weber, the train's conductor, took charge with the methodical efficiency of Swiss authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your compartments. We shall conduct a thorough search." The thief cannot have gone far. We are, after all, quite thoroughly trapped. As Weber and his staff began their systematic investigation, the full impossibility of the situation became clear. The Winter Star had vanished from a locked room, under the nose of a witness, on a train surrounded by impassable snow. No one could board or leave. No one could hide the evidence outside. Yet somehow, a priceless sapphire had simply ceased to exist. I found myself thinking, as I often did in moments of perplexity, of a certain Belgian gentleman whose reputation for solving impossible puzzles had become legendary throughout Europe. The thought had barely formed when fate, with its characteristic sense of theater, provided the most extraordinary coincidence. A knock at the dining car door announced the arrival of Hans, a local boy who served as messenger for the railway company. He had skied through the blizzard from the nearest station, carrying dispatches and passenger telegrams. Among his deliveries was a message that made Weber's eyebrows rise in surprise. "Mein Gott," he murmured, then raised his voice to address our anxious gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have among us a passenger of some distinction. Is there a Monsieur Hercule Poirot aboard this train?" The silence that followed was broken by a small, precise cough from the corner of the dining car, where a diminutive figure in an impeccable overcoat had been sitting so quietly that most of us had forgotten his presence entirely. "I am Hercule Poirot," came the reply in accented English, delivered with the quiet authority of one accustomed to having his name recognized. "And I believe, mes amis, that this storm has provided us with more than inconvenience. It has given us a puzzle worthy of our attention." The little Belgian detective rose from his seat, his egg-shaped head tilted at an angle of professional interest, his green eyes already cataloguing details that the rest of us had missed. The Winter Star had vanished, but Hercule Poirot had arrived. The game, as they say, was afoot. Outside, the blizzard continued its relentless assault, sealing us in our luxurious prison. Inside, a master of detection prepared to match his legendary little grey cells against an impossible crime. The midnight train had become a stage, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama that would test the limits of logic itself. The transformation in our little company was immediate and profound. Where moments before we had been merely passengers united by misfortune, we now found ourselves witnesses to something far more significant, the beginning of a Hercule Poirot investigation. The great detective's reputation preceded him like an aura of competence, and even in our distressed circumstances there was an undeniable sense that order would emerge from chaos. Poirot stepped forward with the quiet authority that marked all his movements, his egg-shaped head tilted at that characteristic angle of intense concentration. His green eyes swept the assembled company with methodical precision, cataloguing each face, each gesture, each telltale sign of human emotion under stress. "If you permit," he said to Weber, his accented English carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "we shall create first the order. From the order, the truth. She will reveal herself in due time." Weber, visibly relieved to defer to such expertise, nodded gratefully. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, the railway company places itself entirely at your disposal." "Très bien. First, we secure our theatre of investigation. No one leaves the first-class carriages. The external doors, they are sealed by nature herself, but we make it formal, yes?" Poirot's gesture encompassed our little world with precise economy. "The keys, if you please, Herr Weber." Within minutes, the conductor had collected duplicate keys and stationed porters at both ends of our corridor. The messenger boy, exhausted from his heroic ski through the blizzard, was dispatched to the staff quarters with hot cocoa and warm blankets. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, but inside, a different kind of intensity was building. "Now," Poirot continued, approaching Madame Volkoff with the gentle courtesy he reserved for those in genuine distress, "we shall hear what is necessary. Madame, permit me to express my sympathy for your loss. The Winter Star, she is famous even to one such as myself. But perhaps you might tell Poirot exactly what occurred." Madame Volkoff, her composure somewhat restored by the detective's reassuring presence, recounted her story with careful attention to detail. Her voice, still carrying traces of her aristocratic Russian accent, painted a picture of routine transformed into nightmare. She had secured the sapphire in her compartment's small wall safe, using a combination known only to herself: her late husband's birthday. The theft had occurred during her brief absence, no more than 5 minutes spent in the washroom at the corridor's end. "The door was locked when I returned," she emphasized, her pale fingers twisting the fabric of her evening gloves. "The window, frozen shut since we entered the mountains, and Albert was in the corridor the entire time." Poirot's head tilted slightly. "Monsieur Morse, you were at your station throughout." Albert Morse, the sleeping car attendant, shifted nervously under the detective's penetrating gaze. "Yes, sir. I was tending to the lamp near Madame's door. It had been flickering all evening. I stayed to ensure it would hold steady." "You remained there the entire time Madame was absent?" A flush crept up Morse's neck. "Well, sir, I did step away briefly. Miss Whitmore had rung for hot water, and her bell was most insistent." Miss Whitmore's sharp features revealed a flicker of annoyance. "Lady Pemberton's compress was cooling. I hardly expected my request to compromise railway security." "How long were you away from your post?" Poirot asked mildly. "Perhaps 20 seconds, sir. No more." 20 seconds, Poirot murmured, his eyes growing distant. In 20 seconds, a skilled person might accomplish much, if they knew precisely what they intended to do. The detective moved to examine Madame Volkoff's compartment, his keen gaze taking in every detail of the small, luxuriously appointed space. The forced safe gaped like a wound in the mahogany paneling, its lock showing the minute scratches Weber had described, the work of someone with considerable expertise. "The combination was not used," Poirot observed, producing a small magnifying glass from his waistcoat. "This is the work of one who understands such mechanisms intimately. Not the desperate fumbling of an opportunist, but the precise application of professional skill." As he worked, I observed the effect his presence had on our fellow passengers. Each person seemed to feel the invisible weight of his scrutiny. Lady Pemberton's fan snapped open and shut with nervous energy. Mr. Ashford's banker's smile had grown rigid, his hands carefully still in his lap. Captain Forrester swayed slightly, the brandy and the situation combining to make him increasingly voluble. "Damned peculiar business," the captain declared with forced heartiness. Locked rooms and vanishing jewels sounds like something from one of Miss Harrington's detective novels. Miss Harrington herself watched these proceedings with professional fascination. Reality, Captain, often proves stranger than fiction. The impossible crime mirrors the perversity of actual events. Dr. Mukherjee, who had remained quietly observant, stepped forward with measured grace. Mr. Poirot, the medical profession teaches us to look beyond obvious symptoms to underlying conditions. This theft exhibits symptoms that may not reflect the true nature of the disease. Poirot's eyebrows rose with genuine appreciation. Ah, doctor, you speak wisdom. In matters of crime, as in matters of the heart, the obvious explanation is often the least likely to prove correct. He straightened from his examination of the safe, his expression thoughtful. We have here a puzzle of considerable complexity. A locked room, a skilled thief, and a window of opportunity measured in seconds. But Poirot has learned that human nature, she is more intricate than any mechanism. The blizzard howled outside, sealing us in our luxurious prison, while inside, the greatest detective in the world prepared to unravel a mystery that seemed to defy all logic. Poirot's presence transformed our little gathering from a collection of anxious passengers into something more focused and purposeful. The great detective moved with the quiet authority of a conductor preparing his orchestra, each gesture precise and economical. He arranged chairs in the dining car with mathematical precision, creating what he called the theater of truth. "We shall proceed with method," he announced, settling himself at the head of the longest table. "Order is the enemy of confusion, and confusion is the friend of the guilty. Herr Weber, if you would be so kind as to establish our timeline with Swiss precision." Weber consulted his pocket watch, his movements betraying the relief of a man grateful to defer to expertise. The theft was discovered at precisely 9:47, Monsieur Poirot. Madame Volkoff had departed her compartment at 9:42. 5 minutes, Poirot murmured, his egg-shaped head tilting at that characteristic angle of intense concentration. In 5 minutes, someone accomplished what should have been impossible. Let us examine this impossibility with the care it deserves. His green eyes swept the assembled company, cataloguing each face, each gesture, each telltale sign of human emotion under pressure. He began with Albert Morse, the sleeping car attendant, whose nervous energy was palpable as he twisted his cap between trembling fingers. Under Poirot's gentle but persistent questioning, the young man's story emerged with greater clarity. At 9:43, Miss Whitmore's bell had summoned him with unusual insistence. Hot water was required for Lady Pemberton's compress. The errand had taken him perhaps 20 steps down the corridor to the service cupboard and back, no more than 20 seconds away from his post near Madame Volkoff's door. 20 seconds, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. And during these 20 seconds, you observed nothing unusual? No sounds, no movements, no shadows. Morse shook his head vigorously. Nothing, sir. Just the wind howling something fierce outside. When I returned to my post, everything seemed normal. The corridor was empty, Madame's door still closed. You are certain of the timing? Yes, sir. I pride myself on efficiency. Miss Whitmore's request was urgent, and I responded immediately. When Miss Whitmore herself was summoned, she entered with the brisk authority of one accustomed to managing both crises and aristocrats. Her sharp features revealed nothing as she confirmed her story. Lady Pemberton's neuralgia had required immediate attention, and the compress had been cooling rapidly. The timing was unfortunate, she admitted with characteristic precision, but hardly planned. One cannot schedule the onset of her ladyship's headaches to accommodate railway security. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Indeed not, mademoiselle. But tell me, how did you know that Madame Volkoff had left her compartment? The corridor. She is not visible from your quarters. The question caught her momentarily off guard. I heard her door close. One develops an ear for such things when traveling frequently with an employer who requires constant attention. And you rang for Monsieur Morse immediately upon hearing this door. The compress was cooling, as I said. The timing was purely coincidental. As she spoke, Poirot noticed her gaze drift momentarily toward the service area at the car's end. A glance so brief it might have been meaningless, yet nothing escaped the detective's attention. Dr. Mukherjee proved to be an exceptionally observant witness. His medical training had taught him to notice details others might miss, and his testimony introduced the first concrete physical evidence of the evening. I was returning from the baggage car with a small medical case for Lady Pemberton, he explained in his careful, cultured English. As I passed through the corridor near 9:45, I detected a distinctive tobacco scent. Not the Virginia blend common in first-class carriages, but something more exotic. Turkish, perhaps, or Egyptian. Near the corridor lamp, there was a slight smear on the brass handrail, as if a gloved hand, dusty with ash, had brushed against it. Poirot's eyes brightened with genuine interest. Most observant, Doctor. And this scent, you are certain it was not from any of our fellow passengers? Quite certain. I've been noting such details throughout our journey. This was distinctly different from anything I'd encountered in our company. The revelation cast a new light on the evening's events. Someone had been in that corridor who should not have been there. Someone whose habits differed from those of our established group. When Madame Volkoff was questioned again, a troubling detail emerged. Under Poirot's gentle but persistent inquiry, she admitted that her personal secretary in Geneva, a woman named Anya Petrov, knew the combination to her safe. Anya has been with me for 3 years, she explained, her voice defensive. She handles my correspondence, my appointments. The combination was necessary for her to access important documents when I traveled. And where is Mademoiselle Petrov now? In Geneva, attending to my affairs there. She could not possibly be involved. Poirot made a careful note, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. The interview with Mr. Ashford proved particularly illuminating. The banker's professional composure remained intact, but his admission regarding his experience with displaced nobility's assets hung in the air like smoke. My bank has occasionally facilitated the conversion of historical pieces into more liquid assets, he explained with careful diplomacy. The aftermath of the Great War left many noble families in reduced circumstances. Discretion in such matters is essential. And the Winter Star, you would be familiar with its provenance and value. Ashford's smile was professionally warm but revealed nothing. Pieces of such historical significance are well documented in certain circles. The Winter Star's reputation precedes it. You have never been approached regarding its potential sale? I deal in financial instruments, Monsieur Poirot, not in the solicitation of family heirlooms. The response was carefully phrased, neither confirming nor denying, yet something in its very precision suggested layers of meaning beneath the surface. Captain Forrester's interview revealed a man struggling with more than the effects of brandy. His military bearing remained rigid, but his responses carried an undercurrent of bitterness that spoke to deeper troubles. I was in my compartment during the relevant time, he stated with parade ground precision. A gentleman does not lurk in corridors observing his fellow passengers. Yet your compartment window faces the corridor, Poirot observed mildly. And brandy sometimes makes one restless, observant. Forrester's jaw tightened. Are you suggesting I was spying on people? I suggest nothing, Captain. I merely observe that military training teaches one to notice details, and that personal troubles sometimes make such observations more acute. The hit struck home. Forrester's composure cracked slightly, revealing a man carrying burdens that went beyond mere financial difficulty. As the interviews concluded, Poirot sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled in contemplation. The impossible theft was becoming less impossible with each revelation, but infinitely more complex. Physical evidence pointed to an outsider, yet logic insisted the thief was among us. Financial motives intertwined with personal secrets, and the precise timing of events suggested planning that went far beyond mere opportunity. The blizzard continued its relentless assault outside, sealing us in our luxurious prison. Inside, the great detective had begun his methodical dissection of human nature, and already the careful facades were showing cracks. The first phase of his investigation was complete, but the expression on his face suggested that the real mystery was only beginning to reveal itself. "Mes amis," he said finally, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him legendary. "We have established much, but understood little. The winter star has vanished, yes, but the true puzzle lies not in its disappearance, but in the why of its taking. Someone among us knows more than they have revealed, and Poirot, he will discover what that something is." The weight of Poirot's observation settled over our gathering like morning mist, each person retreating into private calculation of what they had revealed and what remained concealed. The detective himself appeared lost in contemplation, his green eyes distant as his legendary little grey cells processed the intricate web of information gathered thus far. It was Weber who broke the contemplative silence, approaching with the methodical efficiency that marked all his actions. "Monsieur Poirot, with your permission, I should like to examine the attendants' quarters more thoroughly. If someone among the staff possessed the skills necessary for this theft—" "Mais oui," Poirot agreed, rising with fluid grace. "The physical evidence, she must be allowed to speak before we listen too closely to the whispers of human nature." We proceeded to the narrow service area, where the sleeping car attendants maintained their personal effects. Weber unlocked a series of small lockers with the air of a man performing an unpleasant but necessary duty. The first two revealed nothing more interesting than spare uniforms and personal toiletries, but Albert Morse's locker yielded discoveries that caused Weber's eyebrows to rise in grim satisfaction. Tucked beneath a rolled scarf, almost as if hidden in haste, lay a flat tin decorated with arabesque patterns. Weber opened it to reveal several Egyptian cigarettes, their distinctive aroma immediately recognizable as the exotic tobacco Dr. Mukherjee had detected in the corridor. "I don't smoke those, sir," Morse protested, his face pale as fresh snow. "I've never seen that tin before in my life." But Weber's expression had grown darker still as he continued his examination. Wrapped in a small cloth pouch at the very back of the locker was a set of delicate instruments that glinted in the lamplight. Lock picks, tension bars, a coil of piano wire, and a tiny drill no larger than a thimble. "Professional tools," Weber declared with the satisfaction of a man who has found his culprit. "Here is your skilled hand, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot examined the instruments with his characteristic thoroughness, holding each to the light and testing their weight with the delicacy of a jeweler. His expression, however, was not one of triumph, but of deepening puzzlement. "Curious," he murmured, lifting one pick to his nose. "They smell of the oil that new metal wears from the shop. Observe, Herr Weber, the edges. No burrs from practice, no minute scoring from use. The drill bit is pristine. This is not a craftsman's kit that has seen service. It is a display, arranged for discovery." Weber's certainty wavered. "But the cigarettes, the scent the doctor described—" "May be planted where they will be noticed," Poirot interrupted gently, "or exchanged in friendship, or borrowed in curiosity. The human capacity for innocent explanation is infinite, while the capacity for perfect guilt is remarkably rare." At that moment, Hans, the messenger boy who had skied through the blizzard, appeared again at the dining car entrance, this time bearing a telegram addressed specifically to Poirot. The detective read it with his customary methodical precision, his expression revealing nothing of its contents until he had finished and carefully folded the paper into his waistcoat pocket. "Mes amis," he announced, turning to address our anxious gathering. "The plot, as you English say, thickens considerably. I have received information from Geneva that casts our situation in rather different light." He paused, allowing the tension to build with theatrical precision. It appears that Madame Volkov's secretary, Mademoiselle Anya Petrov, has not been seen at her usual haunts for the past 3 days. Her landlady reports that she departed suddenly, taking only a small traveling case and leaving no forwarding address. Madame Volkov's composure, already strained by the evening's events, shattered completely. Impossible! Anya would never. She is completely trustworthy. I have treated her like family. Family, Poirot repeated thoughtfully, his head tilting at that characteristic angle of intense interest. Yes, family relationships can be most complex, can they not? Tell me, madame, what do you know of Mademoiselle Petrov's background? Her family history, her connections before she entered your service? The hesitation was barely perceptible, but nothing escaped Poirot's attention. She came with excellent references. A white Russian family, like my own. Her parents died in the revolution, and she sought employment with other émigrés. I felt kinship with her situation. And these references. From whom did they come? Madame Volkov's silence stretched uncomfortably before she finally shook her head. The émigré community values discretion, Monsieur Poirot. We protect each other's privacy, especially from official inquiries. Before Poirot could pursue this line of questioning further, Dr. Mukherjee cleared his throat diplomatically. Monsieur Poirot, if I may venture an observation? During my earlier examination of the corridor, I noticed something that may prove relevant. The service cupboard that Monsieur Morse accessed, it contains more than hot water and linens. There is a small ventilation grate that appears to connect to the wall space adjacent to the passenger compartments. The revelation electrified our gathering. Weber immediately produced his keys and led us to examine the cupboard in question. Sure enough, behind stacks of towels and blankets, a small ventilation grate showed unmistakable signs of recent disturbance. The screws had been loosened and retightened with care, and traces of plaster dust marked the floor beneath. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed, his excitement barely contained beneath his professional composure. The impossible becomes merely improbable. Someone familiar with the train's construction could have accessed Madame Volkov's compartment through the ventilation system, opened the safe with prior knowledge of the combination, and retreated the same way, all while Monsieur Morse was innocently fetching hot water. But who could possess such specialized knowledge? Weber demanded. The train's construction plans are not public information. Poirot's gaze swept our little company with renewed intensity. No, but they would be available to certain railway employees, to maintenance personnel, to anyone with legitimate reason to understand the train's internal structure. Or, his voice dropped to that particular tone that signaled the approach of revelation, to someone who had arranged for such knowledge to be obtained. He moved to the center of our gathering, his manner suddenly theatrical. Let me present to you, mes amis, a theory. A simple theory, elegant in its directness. We have established that someone could have committed this theft during those crucial 20 seconds when Monsieur Morse was absent from his post. An opportunistic crime, perhaps. Someone lurking in the corridor, waiting for just such a moment, slipping into the compartment, forcing the safe with professional skill, and escaping before discovery. There was a collective sigh of relief among our company, a ripple of understanding. This, finally, was a theory that made sense. Straightforward, plausible, requiring no exotic explanations or impossible coincidences. Captain Forrester nodded vigorously. Exactly what I've been thinking. A professional thief, taking advantage of a moment's opportunity. Clean, efficient, practical. But consider, Poirot continued, his voice dropping slightly as he watched their faces, the implications of such a theory. Our opportunistic thief must also be a connoisseur of locks, familiar with railway construction, possessed of exotic tobacco habits, and blessed with remarkable sang-froid to accomplish such a feat under pressure. Is this not a curious combination of amateur opportunism and professional expertise? Miss Harrington, her novelist's instincts engaged, tapped her chin thoughtfully. "It does rather neatly explain the 20-second window, Monsieur Poirot. But as you suggest, it requires our thief to be remarkably versatile." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Precisely, mademoiselle. And this is where the little grey cells must work hardest to distinguish between the simple truth and the complex lie disguised as simplicity. For if our thief is indeed so versatile, then they are not the amateur opportunist this theory suggests, but someone far more dangerous, someone who has planned this theft with meticulous care and arranged for it to appear spontaneous." The atmosphere in the dining car shifted palpably. The initial comfort offered by the straightforward explanation evaporated, replaced by the chilling realization that if the thief was not merely opportunistic, they were likely a master of deception. And if they were a master of deception, they were almost certainly one of us, one of the seemingly respectable passengers trapped together in our luxurious prison. "The night grows late," Poirot announced finally, "and tired minds make unreliable witnesses. But before we retire, let me leave you with this thought. The truth, like the winter star itself, may be hidden beneath layers of misdirection, but it cannot remain concealed forever. Tomorrow, when the storm clears and our thoughts have settled, we shall continue our investigation. The guilty party may believe they have created the perfect crime, but Poirot has learned that perfection in crime, like perfection in nature, is an illusion that cannot withstand careful examination." The blizzard continued its assault outside, but inside, the temperature of suspicion had risen considerably. Each person seemed to study their companions with fresh eyes, wondering who among them possessed the deadly combination of opportunity, skill, and ruthless calculation necessary for such a theft. The psychological game had begun in earnest, and the net of investigation was tightening with each passing hour. As our company dispersed for the night, the weight of suspicion settled over the first-class carriage like a heavy blanket. Poirot lingered in the dining car, his keen eyes studying the evidence with that methodical precision that had made him legendary. He lifted the lock-picking tools once more, turning them in the lamplight with the delicacy of a jeweler examining precious stones. "Observe, mon ami," he said to Weber, who had remained to secure the evidence. "These instruments, they are not the tools of a practiced thief, but the props of a theatrical performance. The oil is fresh from the manufacturer, the metal unmarked by use. Someone wishes us to believe in the guilt of poor Monsieur Morse, but they have been too clever in their arrangements." Weber frowned, his Swiss precision struggling with the implications. "But the cigarettes, the timing, are exactly what they appear to be," Poirot interrupted gently, "which is precisely why we must suspect them. In my experience, the truth rarely presents itself so conveniently wrapped in ribbon." The detective moved to the service cupboard, examining the ventilation grate with renewed interest. His fingers traced the loosened screws, noting the fresh metal filings that had been carefully brushed away, but not entirely removed. Someone has indeed used this passage, but when? And why leave such obvious signs of their presence? As the night deepened, Poirot positioned himself strategically in the corridor, ostensibly checking the security arrangements, but actually observing the subtle patterns of movement within our confined world. Near midnight, his vigilance was rewarded. A shadow moved past the dimmed corridor lamps, tall, careful, moving with the deliberate stealth of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The figure paused near Madame Volkov's compartment, not attempting entry, but seeming to listen at the door. In that moment of stillness, a small piece of fabric caught on the rough edge of a ventilation grate, tearing free with the faintest whisper of sound. The midnight visitor froze, then quickly retreated, unaware that they had left behind evidence more damning than any planted tool. Poirot waited until the corridor was empty before retrieving the torn fragment, a piece of expensive silk, lustrous even in the dim light, that spoke of quality and wealth. He examined it with his magnifying glass, noting the weave, the dye, the particular sheen that marked it as a garment of considerable value. When morning arrived with its pale, snow-filtered light, Poirot had arranged for Weber to bring detailed blueprints of the sleeping car's construction. The schematics revealed the complex network of ventilation passages that honeycombed the elegant facade, passages that could, theoretically, allow movement between compartments for someone of small stature and considerable agility. "The method becomes clear," Poirot explained to our assembled company over morning coffee, "but the motive remains clouded in deception." He held up the silk fragment, allowing the light to play across its surface. This was torn from a garment worn by someone among us. Someone who used the ventilation system not to commit the original theft, but to observe, to listen, perhaps to plant additional evidence. Miss Harrington, her novelist's instincts fully engaged, leaned forward with interest. "Monsieur Poirot, I've been observing our fellow passengers with professional attention to detail. Last evening, Mr. Ashford's reaction to the theft was remarkably composed, not the surprise of an innocent bystander, but the satisfaction of someone whose expectations had been fulfilled." The banker's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "I hardly see how professional composure constitutes evidence of wrongdoing, Miss Harrington. Some of us are trained to maintain our equilibrium in crisis situations." "Indeed, Monsieur Ashford," Poirot agreed mildly. "But tell me, this equilibrium, does it extend to your knowledge of the Winter Star's true value? In certain discrete markets, such a piece might command a price far exceeding its insurance valuation." The question hung in the air like smoke, and I observed the subtle shift in dynamics among our company. Captain Forrester's hand trembled slightly as he raised his coffee cup, while Madame Volkov watched Ashford with dawning suspicion. "Furthermore," Poirot continued, his voice taking on that particular tone that signaled the approach of revelation, "we must consider the curious case of Mademoiselle Anya Petrov, a secretary who vanishes precisely when her employer's most valuable possession is stolen. This is either the most remarkable coincidence or the most carefully orchestrated deception." Dr. Mukherjee cleared his throat diplomatically. "Monsieur Poirot, in my medical experience, when multiple symptoms appear simultaneously, they often indicate a single underlying condition. Perhaps this theft and this disappearance are not separate events, but different manifestations of the same carefully planned scheme." The psychological pressure was building with each observation, each question, each careful revelation. Someone among our seemingly respectable company was playing a deadly game of deception, but Poirot's methodical approach was slowly exposing the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. "The morning advances," Poirot announced, rising from his chair with fluid grace, "and with it, our understanding of this complex puzzle. But I sense we approach a crucial moment, the point where our thief must choose between continued deception and desperate action. In my experience, such moments often precipitate the very mistakes that lead to resolution." Outside, the blizzard continued its relentless assault, but inside our luxurious prison, the temperature of suspicion had risen to dangerous levels. The first false lead was about to present itself, and with it, the beginning of the psychological duel that would determine whether justice or cunning would ultimately prevail. The morning brought with it a renewed sense of purpose that seemed to crystallize around Poirot's methodical presence. The great detective had spent the early hours in quiet contemplation, his green eyes studying the evidence with that particular intensity that marked the beginning of his most brilliant deductions. When he finally addressed our anxious gathering over coffee and precise toast, his manner carried the weight of inevitable revelations. "Mes amis," he announced, his accented voice cutting through the subdued conversation, "the time has come for a more thorough examination of our little world. Truth, she is a shy creature, but she cannot hide forever from those who seek her with proper method." Weber nodded eagerly, grateful to have concrete action to pursue. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I've prepared a systematic search of all first-class compartments. If evidence exists, we shall find it." The search began with Swiss precision, each compartment methodically examined while its occupant waited with varying degrees of composure in the dining car. Lady Pemberton maintained her aristocratic bearing, though her fingers worried at her pearl necklace with unconscious anxiety. Miss Whitmore sat rigid with disapproval at the invasion of privacy, while Captain Forrester paced with military restlessness, his consumption of morning brandy already evident. Mr. Ashford observed the proceedings with professional detachment, as if evaluating a business proposition rather than a criminal investigation. It was Klaus, the young porter assisting Weber, whose sharp eyes made the discovery that seemed to solve our puzzle. In Albert Morse's narrow staff quarters, tucked beneath folded linens in a way that suggested hasty concealment, lay Madame Volkov's distinctive velvet case. The embossed initials KV caught the lamplight like an accusation, and when Weber opened it with trembling fingers, the depression where the winter star had rested gaped empty as a wound. "Mein Gott," Weber breathed, his satisfaction evident as he held the case aloft. "Here is our proof, the very case stolen from Madame's safe, hidden in the thief's own quarters." The effect on our company was immediate and profound. Madame Volkov stepped forward with a strangled cry, reaching for her case as if it were a lost child returned. The other passengers exchanged glances of relief and vindication. The mystery was solved, the culprit identified, order restored to their disrupted world. Albert Morse, summoned from his confinement, stared at the evidence with the hollow-eyed disbelief of a man watching his world collapse. "I never saw that before in my life," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Someone must have put it there. I swear on my mother's grave I never touched that case." "Enough lies," Weber declared with Germanic finality. "The evidence speaks for itself. First the cigarettes, then the tools, now the case itself. You will be held under guard until the authorities arrive." As Morse was led away, his protests echoing down the corridor, our little company seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The impossible crime had been solved, the guilty party identified and confined. Justice, it appeared, would be served. But Poirot's reaction was markedly different from the general satisfaction that swept through the dining car. His egg-shaped head tilted at that characteristic angle of intense concentration, his green eyes growing distant as his legendary little grey cells processed information that others had missed. "Curious," he murmured, lifting the empty case and examining it with his magnifying glass. "Most curious indeed." Weber frowned at the detective's lack of enthusiasm. "Surely the evidence is conclusive, Monsieur Poirot. What more could we require?" "Only the truth, Herr Weber, and she, as I have observed, is a shy creature." Poirot set the case on the table with precise care, then drew the silk fragment from his waistcoat pocket, laying it beside the velvet like pieces from different puzzles. "Consider, if you will, the convenience of this discovery. The case hidden exactly where it would eventually be found, in the possession of a man already under suspicion. It is, shall we say, almost too perfect." Miss Harrington, her novelist's instincts fully engaged, leaned forward with interest. "You suspect the evidence was planted, Monsieur Poirot?" "I suspect, mademoiselle, that someone wishes us to believe in Monsieur Morse's guilt with a fervor that exceeds the requirements of mere justice. Observe the case itself. No fingerprints on the velvet surface, no dust or debris from hasty concealment, no signs of the rough handling one would expect from a nervous thief hiding his prize." Dr. Mukherjee nodded thoughtfully. "In medical diagnosis, Monsieur Poirot, we learn to distrust symptoms that present too clearly. The obvious answer is often the decoy that conceals the true disease." "Precisely, Doctor, and in this case, we have not merely obvious symptoms, but symptoms that have been carefully arranged for our observation." Poirot's gaze swept our little company with renewed intensity. "Someone among us has gone to considerable trouble to ensure that Albert Morse appears guilty. The question we must ask ourselves is why." The psychological temperature in the dining car rose several degrees as the implications of Poirot's words settled over our gathering. If the evidence against Morse was indeed planted, then the real thief was not only among us, but possessed of a calculating intelligence that had orchestrated an elaborate deception. Captain Forrester, his military bearing rigid with confusion, demanded clarification. "Are you saying the man is innocent, that we've been chasing shadows while the real culprit laughs at our efforts?" "I'm saying, Captain, that the truth is rarely as convenient as we would wish it to be. The guilty party has provided us with a perfect solution, too perfect, perhaps, for those who understand the complexity of human nature." Poirot rose from his chair with fluid grace, his manner taking on that theatrical quality that marked his most significant revelations. "Consider the skill required for this deception. Our mysterious culprit has not merely stolen a jewel. They have created an entire narrative of guilt, complete with physical evidence and logical progression. This is not the work of an opportunistic thief, but of a master manipulator who understands both human psychology and the mechanics of criminal investigation." Lady Pemberton's fan snapped shut with nervous energy. "But if not the attendant, then who? One of us? The suggestion is preposterous." "Is it, madame? We are, after all, a closed circle of suspects, each with our own secrets, our own motives, our own capacity for deception. The locked room that seemed impossible to penetrate may have been impossible precisely because the thief was already inside it. Not in the physical sense, but in the psychological sense. Someone who had legitimate access, legitimate opportunity, legitimate reason to be trusted. The silence that followed was profound and electric. Each person seemed to study their companions with fresh eyes, wondering who among them possessed the deadly combination of opportunity, skill, and ruthless calculation necessary for such an elaborate deception. Mr. Ashford, his banker's composure finally showing cracks, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Monsieur Poirot, while your analysis is thought-provoking, we must surely base our conclusions on evidence rather than speculation. The case was found in Morse's possession. The tools, the cigarettes, the timing, all point to his guilt." "Ah, Monsieur Ashford, you speak like a man of business. Logical, practical, concerned with tangible assets." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "But consider this. If someone wished to frame an innocent man, what better target than a railway employee with access to all compartments, knowledge of the train's construction, and no social standing to protect him from suspicion? Poor Morse is the perfect scapegoat, vulnerable, isolated, unable to defend himself against the word of his social superiors. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and I observed the subtle shift in dynamics among our company. The comfortable certainty of Morse's guilt was evaporating, replaced by the chilling realization that one of us, one of the seemingly respectable passengers trapped together in our luxurious prison, was capable of extraordinary deception and calculated cruelty. "The morning advances," Poirot announced, moving to the window where the blizzard continued its relentless assault, and with it our understanding of this complex puzzle. "But I sense we approach a crucial moment, the point where our true culprit must choose between continued deception and desperate action. In my experience, such moments often precipitate the very mistakes that lead to resolution." Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, sealing us in our world of suspicion and secrets. Inside, the great detective had exposed the first false lead for what it was, an elaborate theatrical performance designed to conceal the truth. The psychological game had begun in earnest, and somewhere among our little company, a master of deception was realizing that their carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble under the relentless pressure of Hercule Poirot's methodical investigation. The net was tightening, but the prey had not yet been caught. The most dangerous phase of the hunt was about to begin. The revelation that Albert Morse was merely a convenient scapegoat rather than the true perpetrator cast a shadow over our little company that no amount of morning coffee could dispel. The comfortable certainty of having identified our culprit had evaporated like mist, leaving behind the far more unsettling realization that a master manipulator walked among us, wearing the mask of respectability while orchestrating an elaborate deception. Poirot seemed energized by this development, his movements carrying the purposeful grace of a conductor preparing for a complex symphony. He arranged himself at the center of our gathering with mathematical precision, his green eyes cataloging each face with renewed intensity. "We have established," he announced, his accented voice cutting through the subdued atmosphere, "that someone wishes us to believe in the guilt of poor Monsieur Morse with a fervor that exceeds mere convenience. But observe, mes amis, how this very perfection becomes their weakness. The guilty party has provided us with too many clues, too convenient a solution. In my experience, the truth is rarely so accommodating." At that moment, Weber approached with another telegram that had arrived with the morning dispatches. The conductor's expression was grave as he handed the message to Poirot, who read it with his customary methodical precision before carefully folding it into his waistcoat pocket. "Mes amis," the detective announced, his manner taking on that theatrical quality that marked his most significant revelations. "We have received most illuminating information from Geneva. It appears that Mademoiselle Anya Petrov, Madame Volkov's trusted secretary of 3 years, has never existed." The effect was immediate and profound. Madame Volkov's face went white as fresh snow, her pale fingers clutching at her velvet gloves. "Impossible. Anya handled my correspondence, my appointments, my most private affairs. I trusted her completely. And therein, Madame, lies the genius of the deception. Your secretary was not merely an employee, but an elaborate fiction, a carefully constructed identity designed to gain access to your most intimate secrets, including the combination to your safe." Poirot's eyes studied her with gentle sympathy. "Tell me, how did this phantom come to your attention?" The hesitation was barely perceptible, but nothing escaped Poirot's attention. "She approached me at a charity function for Russian émigrés. Her story was so similar to my own. Noble family destroyed by revolution, reduced to seeking employment. I felt kinship. A kinship that was deliberately cultivated," Poirot observed. "Someone studied your character, your vulnerabilities, your sympathies, and created the perfect fiction to exploit them. This was not opportunism, but years of careful planning." Dr. Mukherjee cleared his throat diplomatically. "Monsieur Poirot, such an elaborate deception suggests intimate knowledge of Madame's habits and circumstances. The perpetrator would need to understand not only her emotional vulnerabilities, but also her business affairs, her social connections, her daily routines." "Précisément, doctor. And such knowledge could only come from someone in a position to observe, to advise, to gain her confidence through professional relationship." Poirot's gaze swept our little company with methodical precision. "Someone who deals regularly with displaced nobility, who understands their financial pressures, their need for discretion in converting assets to liquid wealth." Mr. Ashford's banker's composure showed the first serious cracks. "Are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot, that I somehow orchestrated this elaborate fiction? The accusation is preposterous." "I suggest nothing, Monsieur Ashford. I merely observe that certain professions provide unique opportunities for both gathering intelligence and disposing of distinctive items without attracting unwanted attention." Poirot moved to examine the silk fragment once more, holding it to the light. "But let us consider the physical evidence. This fabric was torn during someone's midnight reconnaissance. French silk of the finest quality, midnight blue, recently manufactured." His eyes studied each passenger in turn, noting Lady Pemberton's nervous fan, Miss Whitmore's rigid posture, Captain Forrester's trembling hands, Miss Harrington's professional fascination. "Someone among us wore a garment of this precise fabric last evening, someone whose nocturnal wanderings brought them close enough to the ventilation system to leave behind this damning evidence." The psychological pressure was mounting with each careful observation. The blizzard continued its relentless assault outside, sealing us in our world of suspicion and secrets. Inside, the greatest detective in the world was methodically tightening the net around a conspiracy that reached back years and forward into a carefully planned future. The morning advances, Poirot announced, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him legendary. And with it, our understanding of this complex deception. But I sense we approach the crucial moment when our true culprit must choose between continued subterfuge and desperate action. In my experience, such moments often precipitate the very mistakes that lead to resolution. The psychological game had reached its most dangerous phase. Somewhere among our respectable company, a master of deception was realizing that their years of careful planning were unraveling under the relentless pressure of methodical investigation. The next move would determine whether justice or cunning would ultimately prevail in our luxurious prison. The weight of Poirot's revelations about the Phantom Secretary settled over our little company like a suffocating blanket. The comfortable illusions that had sustained us through the night were crumbling, replaced by the stark realization that we had been living among a master of deception whose planning reached back years and whose audacity knew no bounds. The silk fragment lay on the table between us like a challenge, its midnight blue surface catching the lamplight with accusatory brilliance. Miss Whitmore was the first to crack under the mounting pressure. Her rigid composure, maintained through decades of managing aristocratic secrets, finally showed hairline fractures as she shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "This is all very dramatic, Monsieur Poirot, but surely you cannot expect us to believe that one of our respectable company has maintained such an elaborate charade for 3 years. Can I not, mademoiselle?" Poirot's green eyes studied her with the intensity of a jeweler examining a suspect stone. Consider the psychology required for such a deception. Our culprit needed intimate knowledge of Madame Volkov's habits, her vulnerabilities, her financial circumstances. They needed access to her social circles, her business affairs, her most private moments. Such knowledge could only come from someone in a position of trust, someone whose professional relationship provided legitimate reasons for such intimate access. The implication hung in the air like smoke, and I observed how each person reacted to its weight. Mr. Ashford's banker's smile had grown increasingly rigid, his hands carefully still in his lap. Lady Pemberton's fan snapped open and shut with nervous energy, while Captain Forrester swayed slightly, the morning brandy already evident in his bearing. At that moment, Weber approached with evident urgency, carrying a small leather portfolio that bore the railway company's official seal. "Monsieur Poirot, I have received the passenger manifests you requested from Geneva. There are discrepancies that you should examine immediately." Poirot accepted the documents with his characteristic precision, studying them with that methodical attention to detail that had made him legendary. His eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly as he compared the various papers, cross-referencing dates and signatures with the care of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. "Most illuminating," he murmured, then raised his voice to address our anxious gathering. "It appears, mes amis, that our mysterious Anya Petrov was not the only fiction in this elaborate drama. According to these records, one of our fellow passengers has been traveling under false credentials that would have provided perfect cover for orchestrating tonight's theft." The revelation struck our company like a physical blow. Dr. Mukherjee leaned forward with professional interest, while Miss Harrington's novelist instincts sharpened visibly. Most telling of all was the barely perceptible flinch from one member of our group, a reaction so subtle that only Poirot's trained eye would have caught it. "Furthermore," the detective continued, his voice taking on that theatrical quality that marked his most significant revelations, "these same records reveal something even more disturbing. The reservation for our Phantom Secretary's employer was made not 3 years ago, when their relationship supposedly began, but merely 6 months past, precisely when the Winter Star's insurance valuation was updated to reflect its current market value." Madame Volkov's face went white as fresh snow. "Impossible. Anya has been with me since—" She stopped abruptly, her pale fingers clutching at her velvet gloves as memory and reality collided with devastating force. "Since when, madame?" Poirot asked gently. "Take your time. Think carefully about when this trusted secretary actually entered your life, not when you believe she did. The human mind, she is remarkably susceptible to suggestion, especially when the suggestion comes from someone we trust implicitly." The psychological pressure was now approaching its breaking point. Someone among our seemingly respectable company was watching their carefully constructed world collapse under the weight of methodical investigation. The phantom secretary, the planted evidence, the silk fragment, all were pieces of an elaborate puzzle that Poirot was assembling with inexorable precision. "The morning advances," Poirot announced, moving to the window where the blizzard continued its relentless assault, "and with it our understanding of this most complex deception. But I sense we have reached the crucial moment when our true culprit must choose between continued subterfuge and desperate action. The psychological game, Mes Amis, approaches its climax." Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, sealing us in our luxurious prison. Inside, the greatest detective in the world had exposed the intricate web of lies that had ensnared us all. The next move would determine whether justice or cunning would ultimately prevail, but one thing was certain: the final confrontation was approaching, and with it, the moment when all masks would fall away to reveal the true face of evil that had walked among us wearing the perfect disguise of respectability. The psychological duel had reached its most dangerous phase, and somewhere among our little company, a master of deception was preparing for their final, desperate gambit. The psychological pressure that had been building throughout the morning reached a crescendo that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of our luxurious prison. Poirot's methodical dismantling of the elaborate deception had left our little company balanced on the knife's edge of revelation, each person studying their companions with the desperate intensity of those who know that truth is about to emerge from its carefully constructed hiding place. It was Weber who shattered the taut silence, approaching with evident urgency and a face drawn with concern. "Monsieur Poirot, there is smoke detected in the baggage car. Not much, but enough to warrant immediate investigation." The detective was already moving with that fluid grace that marked all his significant actions. "Come, Herr Weber. We do not allow the evidence to become ash." We followed through the swaying gangway into the colder sections of the train where the metal had gathered the night's chill and breathed it back at us. The baggage car carried the scent of dust and coal, but underneath lay something else, something acridly sweet that made Poirot's nostrils flare with recognition. Standing before a small iron stove, a leather portfolio open on a nearby crate, was Mr. Ashford. His banker's composure remained intact, but there was something too studied about his casualness, as though calm were a garment he had put on hastily and buttoned incorrectly. "Routine correspondence," he explained with professional blandness. "Private papers that might embarrass clients in the event of a public inquiry." The porter was kind enough to allow me to warm myself while disposing of outdated memoranda. Poirot's keen gaze took in every detail of the scene with jeweler's precision. He lifted the stove lid slightly with a rag, peered inside, then closed it with delicate care. Using tongs, he extracted fragments that had charred at their edges but retained their identity. Heavy blue paper bearing a discreet crest and another scrap showing typed text ending in the partial signature, Spa, Ford. "Most considerate of you, Monsieur Ashford," Poirot observed mildly. "But observe also the scent that clings to this place, Turkish tobacco with the distinctive note of bergamot. The same exotic aroma that Dr. Mukherjee detected in our corridor last evening." Ashford's smile thinned almost imperceptibly. "The baggage car is hardly a perfume salon, Monsieur Poirot." "Indeed not. Yet bergamot is most distinctive, present in certain Turkish cigarette blends, and also in the finer colognes favored by gentlemen of discerning taste." Poirot handed the rescued paper fragments to Weber with ceremonial care. "We shall preserve what may yet prove illuminating." As we prepared to return to the first-class carriages, a commotion erupted from the service corridor. Klaus appeared, his face white with shock, beckoning frantically toward the narrow passage beside the linen cupboard. There, crumpled against the wall, lay Albert Morse with a thin coil of wire looped cruelly about his neck. Dr. Mukherjee was instantly beside the fallen man, his movements precise and authoritative. "Unconscious but alive," he announced after a tense examination, using his penknife to cut the wire with expert efficiency. "Strangulation attempted from behind, then released before completion. The pulse is weak but steady." Poirot knelt opposite the doctor, his attention focused not on Morse, but on the surrounding area. With his characteristic tweezers, he lifted a tiny thread from the door jamb. Midnight blue silk that caught the lamplight like an accusation. "Again our mysterious fabric," he murmured. And again, the touch of theatrical excess. Observe the angle of the wire, the position of the body. This was staged to appear as suicide, but the physics are all wrong. A man strangling himself would not achieve this particular configuration. Morse's eyes fluttered open, and he made a rasping sound that gradually formed words. "Gloves," he croaked, his voice barely audible. "Smooth leather, and the smell like orange peel, sharp and clean." "Bergamot," Poirot confirmed, meeting my gaze with significant meaning. "Present in certain Turkish tobacco blends, and in the cologne of someone who wishes to mask other scents." As Morse was carefully moved to a secure location under Dr. Mukherjee's care, Poirot examined the ventilation grate near the attack site. His magnifying glass revealed fresh scratches on the screws, all on the left side, indicating they had been turned by someone who favored their left hand. "We have now the second crime," Poirot announced to our anxious gathering as we reassembled in the dining car. "Its purpose is transparent, to eliminate the convenient scapegoat before he could become inconvenient. But observe how it fails, and in its failure reveals the mind of our adversary. Someone who cannot resist the theatrical gesture, who must arrange even violence into an artistic composition." His green eyes swept our company with renewed intensity. "The pattern becomes unmistakable, mes amis. Physical evidence appears and disappears with suspicious convenience. Documents burn at precisely the moment when scrutiny turns toward false identities. An innocent man nearly dies to preserve a carefully constructed lie. We are not dealing with a simple thief, but with a master manipulator who understands both criminal investigation and human psychology." The blizzard continued its assault outside, sealing us in our world of mounting suspicion. Inside, the greatest detective in the world had gathered the threads of evidence that would soon weave themselves into an inescapable net. The psychological duel had reached its most dangerous phase, and somewhere among our respectable company, a master of deception was realizing that their perfect crime was becoming their perfect downfall. The attempt on Albert Morse's life had transformed our investigation from an intellectual puzzle into something far more sinister. The comfortable illusion that we were dealing with a mere thief had shattered completely, replaced by the stark realization that someone among us possessed not only the cunning to orchestrate an elaborate deception, but the ruthless determination to commit murder when that deception was threatened. Poirot responded to this escalation with characteristic methodical precision, but there was a new intensity in his movements, a sharpened focus that spoke to the gravity of our situation. He arranged for Morse to be moved to a secure compartment under Dr. Mukherjee's continued care, with Weber posting guards at both ends of our corridor. No one would move unaccompanied. The luxury of privacy had become a dangerous indulgence we could no longer afford. The psychology, she reveals herself most clearly under pressure. Poirot announced to our anxious gathering. Our adversary has shown us their true nature, not merely a thief, but someone willing to kill to preserve their secret. This desperation, it becomes their weakness. He began with what appeared to be a simple exercise, requesting that each passenger provide a brief written account of their movements during the crucial period the previous evening. The request seemed almost trivial after the morning's dramatic revelations, yet I observed how each person's reaction revealed volumes about their state of mind. Lady Pemberton wrote with aristocratic stiffness, her pen held with the rigid precision of one maintaining composure through sheer force of will. Miss Whitmore's lips compressed into a thin line as she accepted the pen, her movements sharp with barely contained anxiety. Most telling was Mr. Ashford's response. His banker's training showed in the professional neatness of his script, but I noticed how he paused before beginning, how his eyes darted briefly toward the window as if calculating distances and possibilities. When he returned the pen, his usual confident smile had acquired a brittle quality that hadn't been present before. Poirot examined each sheet with his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the blotting paper and the pen nib itself. "Observe," he murmured to Weber, "how the wet ink betrays the left-handed writer. See here, where the hand passes over fresh words, leaving these distinctive smudges. Most illuminating." Captain Forrester flushed at the observation. "Broke my right wrist in Peshawar," he explained gruffly. "Had to learn to write with my left. Military necessity." "Indeed, Captain. Such adaptations tell us much about a person's capabilities under pressure." Poirot's tone was mild, but his green eyes missed nothing as they catalogued this information alongside the evidence of left-handed manipulation found at the ventilation grate. The detective then produced a handkerchief from his pocket, one that carried the distinctive scent Dr. Mukherjee had detected during the previous evening's events. As he passed it among our company, the reactions were immediate and revealing. Lady Pemberton wrinkled her nose in distaste. Citrus and something foreign, rather vulgar. Miss Whitmore barely touched it to her nose before pulling back. Cologne, most unpleasant. But it was Mr. Ashford's reaction that proved most significant. His face remained professionally blank, but there was a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. "Bergamot, yes," he acknowledged with careful neutrality. "Not uncommon in better cologne." "Uncommon in this particular combination," Poirot corrected gently. "Turkish tobacco with bergamot cologne creates a very distinctive signature, one that lingers in confined spaces and clings to fabric." The detective's next move was to examine the outer garments that had been stored in the corridor's cloak cupboard. His delicate fingers moved along seams and linings with the precision of a jeweler, twice pausing to extract small pieces of evidence. A burr of plaster dust from one hem, caught during passage through the narrow ventilation space. A thread of midnight blue silk, the same distinctive weave that had appeared at every crucial moment of the investigation. "The evidence accumulates like snowfall," Poirot observed, arranging these items on the table with mathematical precision. "Each piece insignificant alone, but together forming a pattern that cannot be ignored. Our thief moves through our world with confidence, leaving traces at every turn because they believe themselves too clever to be caught." Weber approached with another telegram, this one bearing official seals that spoke of serious inquiry. Poirot read it with his customary thoroughness before addressing our increasingly anxious company. "The authorities in Geneva have been most thorough in their investigations," he announced. "It appears that the banking records show several transactions involving items of historical significance, pieces that bear remarkable similarities to certain Russian imperial jewels that have appeared on the discreet market in recent years. The seller, it seems, has been most careful to maintain anonymity, but certain patterns emerge when one knows where to look. The psychological pressure was mounting with each revelation, each careful observation. Mr. Ashford's professional composure was showing increasing strain, his hands no longer quite steady as he reached for his coffee cup. The other passengers watched with the fascination of those witnessing a master craftsman at work, but underneath lay the growing awareness that one among them was not what they seemed. The morning advances toward afternoon. Poirot announced, his voice carrying that particular tone that marked the approach of significant revelation. Soon the truth will emerge from the shadows where it has hidden so cleverly. But first, we must gather one final piece of evidence, the piece that will transform speculation into certainty. Outside, the blizzard continued its relentless assault, sealing us in our luxurious prison. Inside, the greatest detective in the world had assembled nearly all the pieces of an extraordinarily complex puzzle. The psychological duel was approaching its climax, and somewhere among our respectable company, a master of deception was realizing that their perfect crime was about to become their perfect downfall. The afternoon light, though filtered by the storm's continuing assault, cast long shadows across our dining car as Poirot prepared for what I recognized as his final revelation. The great detective had arranged our little company with theatrical precision, each person positioned where the light would catch their expressions, where no gesture or reaction could escape his penetrating gaze. "Mes amis," he began, his accented voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "we have reached the moment when all masks must fall away. The winter star has vanished, yes, but more than a jewel has been stolen. Trust has been betrayed, lives have been endangered, and an innocent man nearly died to preserve a lie. The time has come for truth to emerge from the shadows where it has hidden so cleverly." He moved to the center of our gathering, his egg-shaped head tilted at that characteristic angle of intense concentration. "Let me present to you the anatomy of a perfect crime, perfect in its conception, flawed only in its execution by the very human weaknesses that no amount of planning can entirely eliminate." Poirot began with methodical precision, addressing each element of the deception in turn. "First, we must dispose of the obvious suspect, poor Albert Morse. The evidence against him was too convenient, too perfectly arranged. The lock-picking tools, pristine from the manufacturer. The exotic cigarettes, planted where they would be discovered. The timing that made him appear guilty. All of this was theatrical staging, designed to focus our attention on the convenient scapegoat, while the true culprit remained hidden in plain sight. He lifted the silk fragment, allowing the afternoon light to play across its midnight blue surface. This fabric has appeared at every crucial moment of our investigation. Torn during nocturnal reconnaissance, present at the scene of attempted murder, consistent in its testimony to the identity of our culprit. French silk of the finest quality, recently manufactured, and worn by someone who moves through our world with the confidence of absolute respectability. The creation of Anya Petrov was not merely clever. It was genius, Poirot continued, his voice carrying the admiration one professional might feel for another's skill. For 3 years, this phantom secretary gained intimate knowledge of Madame Volkov's affairs, her business dealings, her social connections, her most valuable possessions. But most importantly, she learned the combination to the safe, ostensibly to access important documents in Madame's absence. Madame Volkov's face had gone white as fresh snow. But Anya was so real, so trustworthy. She understood my circumstances, my background, precisely because she was created by someone who understood exactly what would inspire your trust, what stories would evoke your sympathy, what credentials would satisfy scrutiny without inviting deeper investigation. Poirot moved to examine the evidence he had arranged with mathematical precision. The physical evidence tells a clear story to those who know how to read it. The left-handed manipulation of the ventilation grate screws. The distinctive cologne scent, bergamot with subtle notes that mask other odors. The midnight blue silk torn during careful reconnaissance. The professional knowledge required to create false documents and maintain a fictional identity for 3 years. His green eyes swept our company before settling on a single figure. "Miss Agnes Whitmore, you have been remarkably quiet during our investigation. For someone whose profession requires managing the most intimate details of aristocratic life, you have shown surprising restraint in offering observations." The effect was immediate and devastating. Miss Whitmore's rigid composure cracked like ice under pressure, her sharp features revealing the calculation that had lurked beneath her facade of professional propriety. For a moment, she seemed to consider denial, but Poirot's methodical presentation had left no room for deception. "You created Anya Petrov as your masterpiece," Poirot continued, his voice carrying that particular tone that marked the approach of complete revelation. "Your position as Lady Pemberton's companion provided perfect cover. You moved through the highest circles of society, invisible yet observant, trusted yet never truly seen. You understood better than anyone how to create the perfect employee, someone who would inspire confidence without attracting suspicion." Lady Pemberton's fan snapped shut with a sound like breaking glass. "Agnes? But she's been with our family for decades. The suggestion is impossible." "Is it, my lady? Consider the psychology required for such a deception. Your companion needed intimate knowledge of émigré society, understanding of how displaced nobility manages their affairs, access to the social connections necessary to create convincing references. Most importantly, she needed to be someone so trusted, so invisible in her competence, that she could orchestrate an elaborate fraud while maintaining her position in your household. The method becomes clear when we understand the timeline," Poirot explained, producing his notebook with theatrical precision. "The theft did not occur last evening during Madame's brief absence. It occurred weeks ago during one of her extended trips to Vienna, when the trusted secretary had legitimate access to the safe. The Winter Star was replaced with an expertly crafted replica, good enough to fool casual observation, but worthless paste and glass. The revelation struck our company like a physical blow. Madame Volkoff reached instinctively for her throat, where the necklace she had worn so proudly now seemed to burn against her skin. The theatrical performance we witnessed last evening was merely the final act," Poirot continued. "Miss Whitmore needed the theft to be discovered at a specific time, in a specific way, with a convenient scapegoat already prepared. The phantom secretary's convenient disappearance, the planted evidence against Morse, the impossible locked room mystery, all designed to focus our attention on method rather than motive." Miss Whitmore finally found her voice, though it carried none of its former authority. "You cannot prove any of this. The evidence is circumstantial at best." "Can I not, mademoiselle? Let us examine not merely the physical evidence, but the psychological profile of our culprit." Poirot's voice softened with something approaching sympathy. 30 years you have spent managing the secrets of the aristocracy, invisible in your competence, essential yet never acknowledged. You have watched your employer spend more on a single evening's entertainment than you earn in a year, all while depending upon your discretion, your intelligence, your absolute reliability. The bitterness in Miss Whitmore's laugh was sharp as winter wind. "Invisible. Yes, that captures it perfectly. Decades of faithful service, of protecting their reputations, of managing their scandals, all for wages that wouldn't keep a scullery maid in decent clothing. So you created Anya Petrov as your instrument of revenge," Poirot observed. "Not merely to steal the Winter Star, but to prove that you could manipulate those who had never truly seen you, never recognized your intelligence or capability. The perfect crime, planned for years, executed with flawless precision until the storm trapped us together and forced your hand." Weber stepped forward with official authority, but Miss Whitmore held up a hand with dignity intact, despite her circumstances. "I require no physical compulsion, Herr Weber. I've played my game and lost to a better player." She turned to Poirot with something approaching respect. "The Winter Star is already beyond recovery, sold to collectors who ask no inconvenient questions. At least I have that satisfaction." As she was led away, her composure finally cracking to reveal the years of accumulated resentment and wounded pride, Poirot turned to address our shaken company. "The human heart, mes amis, is the most complex mystery of all. Miss Whitmore possessed the intelligence to orchestrate this elaborate deception, the skill to maintain it for years, and the ruthless determination to kill when it was threatened. But she lacked the wisdom to understand that true satisfaction comes not from revenge, but from recognition earned through honest endeavor. Outside, the blizzard was finally beginning to abate, the first breaks in the clouds allowing pale sunlight to penetrate our luxurious prison. Inside, justice had been served, though at the cost of shattering illusions that had sustained us all. Albert Morske was cleared of all suspicion and restored to his position with Weber's personal apology and a commendation for his courage under impossible circumstances. Dr. Mukherjee's medical attention had prevented any lasting harm from the attempted strangulation. The phantom secretary, Anya Petrov, was revealed as the masterwork of a brilliant but twisted mind, while the very real Miss Agnes Whitmore would face justice for her crimes. As the train finally began to move again, cutting through the diminishing snow toward our destination, Poirot stood at the window, his green eyes thoughtful as he gazed out at the clearing storm. "Tell me, Poirot," I asked, approaching him as the alpine landscape rolled past our windows, "did you suspect Miss Whitmore from the beginning?" His smile was enigmatic, touched with that particular satisfaction that marked the successful completion of a complex puzzle. The human mind, mon ami, reveals itself through 1,000 small betrayals. Miss Whitmore's mistake was not in the planning of her crime. That was nearly flawless. Her error was in believing that invisibility was the same as invincibility. She had spent so many years being overlooked that she forgot she could also be observed. He adjusted a small speck of dust on his sleeve with characteristic precision. The little gray cells, they do not distinguish between the servant and the served, between the visible and the invisible. They see only the truth, and the truth she cannot remain hidden forever, no matter how cleverly she disguises herself. The midnight train continued its journey through the clearing storm, carrying us toward our destination and away from the scene of one of the most elaborate deceptions in criminal history. But the memory of those few days trapped in our luxurious prison, watching a master detective unravel the threads of human duplicity, would remain with us always, a reminder that justice, however delayed, will ultimately prevail when pursued with method, patience, and an unwavering commitment to truth. The winter star was lost, perhaps forever, but in its place we had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that even the most perfect crime contains within it the seeds of its own destruction, and that somewhere in the world there exists a small Belgian gentleman with an egg-shaped head and penetrating green eyes, ready to ensure that no deception, however elaborate, can withstand the methodical application of logic and the relentless pursuit of justice. The blizzard had passed, but its lessons would endure. The truth, like light itself, cannot be permanently obscured, and that the human capacity for both evil and justice remains the greatest mystery of all.